Blueprints. Golden hour, Brickell. Sound. The low, distant murmur of Biscayne Bay, water against pilings. A boat horn, far off. The muffled percussion of a city in late afternoon. Inside, the quiet hum of an air-conditioned high-rise, the soft shift of blueprint paper. Miami does not ease into its evenings. It burns into them. The sun in late October still carries a violence that the morning light doesn't, something reckless, something that refuses to go gentle, and at 5:47 in the afternoon. The entire western face of the Voss and Crane offices on the 34th floor of 801 Brickell Avenue was full of it. Gold on glass. Gold on steel. Gold spilling across 1,200 square feet of travertine floor and falling, at last, across the drafting table where Valentina Reyes stood with both palms flat on the surface of a blueprint, as if she could hold it still. As if stillness were something you could press into paper and keep. She was 32 years old and she looked, from a distance, exactly like what she had made herself into. Precise, self-contained, formidable. Dark hair pinned back with 2 pencils she'd forgotten were there. One of them had been there since 9 that morning. A navy dress, linen, slightly wrinkled now at the waist and hem after 12 hours of wearing it through meetings and site calls, and the kind of focused, exhausting effort that most people would not recognize as labor because it looked, from the outside, only like stillness. A woman standing at a window. A woman looking at a city. But the city she was looking at, that was the thing. That was always the thing. Biscayne Bay lay below her like something poured, flat and silver blue and enormous, broken only by the thin dark lines of bridges and the white stitching of wakes left by boats too small to see clearly from this height. The port was visible to the south, the cranes, the container stacks, the low industrial geometry that didn't care about beauty and therefore possessed a brutal kind of it. Beyond that, the bay opened. Beyond that, you could almost imagine the ocean. She was looking at the port. Specifically, she was trying not to. The blueprint under her hands was for the Solara project, her name in the title block, her most ambitious commission to date, and the one that, 9 months ago, when Diana Voss had called her into this same office and slid a folder across a table that cost more than Valentina's car, had felt like the arrival of everything she had worked toward. A mixed-use waterfront development, residences, retail, public promenade, green space, a small performance venue that Valentina had fought for in 3 separate meetings and finally won. It was going to be extraordinary. She could feel that when she looked at it the right way, which was the way she usually looked at it, directly, without apology, with the particular confidence of someone who has learned that talent, like a muscle, will fail you if you do not use it every single day. But tonight, in this light, she was having trouble looking at it directly. Because the Solara project was going up on land adjacent to the port district. 300 meters, give or take, from the section of scaffolding on a waterfront development site where, for years ago, her father had fallen. Where her father had fallen. And died. And been ruled an accident. Don't, she told herself. This is your project. This is yours. You earned this. He would have been proud. He would have been proud. She did not think about whether he would have been afraid. Plan of choosing again and again and again to focus on what she could control. The bay went amber. The sky above the port went the color of a bruise healing. Miami shifted, the way it did, from the city of the day into the city of the night, and Valentina Reyes stood at the window and did not let herself look south for longer than a moment. She was very good at not looking at the things that frightened her. She was getting worse at it every year. The file. Sound, the soft chime of a phone notification. Office ambient, distant conversation in the hall, the low hum of climate control. Then silence. Her phone lit up on the edge of the drafting table at 6:11 p.m. She glanced at it without urgency. She was expecting a text from the structural engineers about load calculations, and she had reached the point in the workday where her brain could process two things at once without losing precision on either. She picked it up. She looked at the screen. Unknown number. No text. Just an image. She opened it. It was a photograph of a document. A city permit document, the specific cream and gray letterhead of the Miami-Dade Office of Development and Building Services, the one she'd spent 3 years navigating in every direction. The bureaucratic texture of it, as familiar to her as her own handwriting. The photograph was clear, taken close up, and she could read most of the text without zooming. What she read made her stop breathing for a moment. The name at the top of the document was Reyes, Ernesto J., contractor of record. The permit number was P 2021-09-4471. She knew that number. She had not seen it in 3 years, but she knew it the way you know certain things, not because you looked them up, but because you heard them once at the worst moment of your life, and they burned themselves into you permanently. That number was on the documentation in her father's old papers, the one she'd gone through twice in the weeks after his death. The one she'd eventually boxed and put in the back of her closet because looking at them was a thing she could only do in small doses before something broke in her chest. P 2021-09-4471. Port District Development Permit. Approved September 2021. Her father had died in November 2021. The cold that moved through her had nothing to do with the air conditioning. It was a specific cold, the cold of recognition, of something true arriving without warning. Her body understood it before her mind finished processing. Her hands were steady. Her hands were always steady. But the thing inside her chest was not. She looked up. She looked around the office. Marisol from the drafting team was packing up her bag near the copy station. Anders, one of the junior architects, was bent over a laptop screen, oblivious. Through the glass wall of the conference room, she could see the tail end of a meeting she had successfully avoided. No one was looking at her. No one was watching. Why do I feel like someone is? She went back to the image. Zoomed in on the lower portion of the document. There was a signature in the approval block. She couldn't read it clearly from the photograph, but below it, a typed name, V. Crane, Deputy Director of Land Acquisitions. Vincent Crane. Diana Voss's partner. The other name on the firm letterhead. She saved the photograph to a hidden album she used for project reference images. She deleted the message. She did not block the unknown number. She stood very still for 11 seconds. She counted them, which was something she did when she needed to keep herself in her body, and then she picked up her tote bag, rolled the Solara blueprint into its tube, and walked to the elevator. The building rose around her as the doors closed. 34 floors of glass and steel and ambition, and somewhere below it all, the city going about its business, knowing nothing, keeping its own counsel. She was afraid. She did not know why yet. Or rather, she did know why. She just wasn't ready to say the word. The elevator descended. Miami bloomed below the window as the floor numbers dropped. She watched it. The bay, the bridges, the port. The port. The doors opened on the lobby. She walked out into the heat. Little Havana after dark. Sound. Calle Ocho alive, distant salsa from a Ventana bar, the rattle of a domino on a folding table, a woman laughing somewhere above street level, the smell of sofrito and cigar smoke that you can almost hear, traffic. Spanish radio from an open car window, a rooster, improbably, 2 blocks over. The Botanica below Rafi's apartment had been there for 30 years, and it smelled like it. Dried herbs and Florida water and the faint sweetness of candle wax from the tall religious candles stacked in the window. Santa Barbara. San Lazaro. La Caridad del Cabra in her blue and gold. Patron of Cuba. Patron of the desperate. patron of anyone who had ever needed to believe that something was watching out for them. Valentina had grown up on this block. She had lit candles in this window with her mother. She knew the smell of this street the way she knew her own heartbeat, without thinking about it, with a depth that was beyond nostalgia, closer to marrow. She pressed the buzzer for 2B, then knocked, then said his name. Rafi. Abra. I know you're up there. A long pause. Then footsteps, uneven, like someone who had been sitting in one position too long. The door opened. Her brother looked like he hadn't slept in 2 days. Maybe 3. He was 28, and he should have been radiating the particular careless vitality of a young man in a city built for young men, but his eyes were hollowed and his jaw held the kind of tension that didn't come from a bad night. This was older. This had been building. Val. His voice was a little rough. You should have called. I did call. She stepped past him into the apartment. 3 times. I texted twice. You left me on read, Raphael. I was busy. You look terrible, she said, not unkindly. She turned to look at him. He was wearing a t-shirt and jeans that had seen better days, and the apartment behind him, which she had helped him set up, had found the furniture for, had argued him into keeping reasonably clean, looked like someone had stopped caring about it very recently. Dishes in the sink. Blinds half drawn against the night. A laptop open on the coffee table with 6 browser tabs she couldn't read from the doorway. You're going to tell me I look terrible, Rafi said, and there was still, underneath the exhaustion, the ghost of the smile that had gotten him out of trouble his entire life. After you drove 40 minutes from Brickell to come check on me. I came because you didn't answer. And because she stopped. She looked at him more carefully. Because something is wrong. Something has been wrong. I have been watching you for 2 months and pretending not to notice because you told me to give you space, and I gave you space, and now I'm here. So tell me. He looked away. He went to the kitchen and opened the refrigerator, an old delay tactic she had watched him use since he was 14. You want cafe? I think I have. Rafi. He closed the refrigerator. He put both hands on the counter. His back was to her, and she could see the way he was holding himself, carefully, like something inside was precarious. Someone's been asking questions, he said finally. About Papa. About his old contracts. The room went very quiet. Valentina sat down on the arm of the couch because her legs asked her to. Who? She said. I don't know exactly. A lawyer, I think, or someone pretending to be a lawyer. They talked to Tio Berto last week. Berto called me. He turned around. His eyes found hers, and what she saw in them was something she hadn't seen in a long time. The face he'd had at 24, the night they buried their father. Young and frightened and furious all at once. They were asking about the Port District job. The last one he was on. Rafi, I know what you're going to say. You don't. What I'm going to say is, tell me everything. Right now. All of it. He shook his head. I can't. No me hagas esto. You cannot, she stopped. Lowered her voice. You cannot look me in the face and tell me something is happening and then say you can't. We are all that's left of us. You understand that? I know that. His voice cracked on it. I know that, Val. Then tell me. A long silence. Outside, the domino game on the corner had gotten louder. Someone had made a play that mattered, and the reaction was theatrical and joyful, the way those things always were on Calle Ocho, life conducting itself at full volume on the sidewalk. Inside the apartment, 2 people who had the same face around the eyes, the same dark, wide-set eyes they'd gotten from Ernesto Reyes, faced each other across a kitchen counter and the larger distance of what couldn't be said. The money I borrowed, Rafi said finally. He said it like he was putting something very heavy down. I told you it was from a friend. A business investment. It wasn't. I know, Valentina said quietly. That surprised him. You know? I've known for a while. I didn't know who. Tell me who. He rubbed his face with both hands, looked at the ceiling, said the name like it was something that tasted bad, people connected to Christian Mello. And there it was. Valentina sat very still. The name landed in the room the way certain things land, without drama, but with weight. Total weight. I didn't know, Rafi said. Val, I swear to you, when I borrowed it, I didn't know whose money it was. It came through 3 intermediaries. I only found out 2 months ago. He looked at her. And I think Papa knew something about Mello. About the Portland. About what was being built there and whose money was in it. I think that's why he died. Long pause. Let this breathe. When you continue, the voice should be contained but fraying at the edges. Valentina was quiet for a long time. She was holding herself together by the engineering principle she trusted most. Structure under load does not collapse if the load is distributed properly. She had been distributing this load for 4 years. She knew how. Does anyone know you told me this? She asked. No. Keep it that way. Don't talk to Berto again about any of this. Don't answer anyone's questions. If anyone reaches out, anyone, Raphael, you text me first. You don't say a word. She stood. She picked up her bag. I'll figure it out. Val, he came after her to the door. How? She paused in the doorway. The night air of Calle Ocho came up to her warm, complex, full of life that had no idea what was happening in this particular apartment above this particular botanica. I don't know yet, she said. I'll let you know. She left without the answer she had come for. She carried, instead, something worse, the confirmation of the question she had always been afraid to ask. The detective. Sound. Underground parking garage, the hollow echo of distant traffic filtered through concrete, the tick of a cooling engine, fluorescent lights buzzing, the city muffled, far above. Marco Duval had been sitting in his car in the parking garage beneath Miami-Dade Police Department for 45 minutes, and he was fine with that. He was good at stillness. It was, his first training officer had told him 17 years ago, his most useful quality as a detective, and also probably the thing that made him difficult to love. He had taken that assessment as a compliment on both counts. He was 36 years old, and he looked like someone who had decided, at some point, to carry every weight he was given without bending. Broad-shouldered, economical in his movements, the kind of face that people remembered as calm even when it wasn't quite. Haitian Creole from his father's side, Black American from his mother's, he had grown up in Opelika and carried the particular alertness of a man who had learned early that his environment would not do him the courtesy of being consistently safe. He had channeled that alertness into a career in which it was a professional asset, and he was, by every metric, very good at his job. The file on his lap said, Reyes Ernesto J., case closed. The stamp across the top was 3 years old. The case had been closed as an accidental death, workplace fall, construction scaffold, Port District development site. Closed before he had much time with it. He'd been pulled to a double homicide in Overtown that needed a senior detective, and the Reyes case had been handed off, and that had been that. Until 3 weeks ago, when an anonymous tip came through the department's general line, not addressed to him specifically, not addressed to anyone, just dropped into the system like a stone into still water. He'd almost missed it. A junior analyst had flagged it as low priority. Marco had happened to see it on the routing sheet and happened to read it, and happened to feel the specific cold clarity in his chest that he associated with the moment a case stopped being paperwork and started being real. The tip referenced a permit number, P 2021-09-4471. He had not seen that permit number in 3 years, but he recognized it. He was very good at remembering numbers that had once mattered, even briefly, even when he'd been pulled away before he could follow them. low, quiet, as if thinking aloud. He picked up his phone. Dialed. It rang 4 times before a man's voice answered, low, slightly wary, the voice of someone who had learned to be careful about late-night calls from certain numbers. Ortega, Marco said. It's Duval. I need a favor, and I need it quiet. A pause. How quiet? Below the waterline. Another pause, longer. Okay. Permit number P 2021-09-4471. Miami-Dade Building Services. I need the full chain of approvals, who signed, who countersigned, who was in the room. And I need any connection to a land acquisition in the Port District, Southwest Quadrant, fall of 2021. That's not nothing, Marco. I know. I'll owe you. You already owe me. I'll owe you more. He paused. Ortega. Be careful who knows you're looking. He hung up. He sat in the garage and looked at the closed file for a while. Ernesto Reyes. 56 years old, contractor, Little Havana. No criminal record. Excellent professional reputation, by all accounts. Dead in November 2021. Ruled accidental. Marco had a very well-developed sense for when accidents were not accidents. He could not have explained it in court. It wasn't evidence. It wasn't data. It was a kind of reading he did of the shape of things, the way an event lay in a timeline, whether the edges were smooth or jagged. The edges of Ernesto Reyes's death were jagged in ways that no one had ever asked about. He didn't know, sitting in that garage at 11 p.m., that a woman on the 34th floor of a glass tower 2 miles north had received a photograph of that same permit number 2 hours earlier. He didn't know her name yet. He didn't know anything about her yet. He didn't know what was coming. He just knew the case was alive, and that he was going to follow it until it wasn't, or until it cost him something. These, he had learned, tended to amount to the same thing. First collision. Sound. Wynwood morning. Espresso machine hissing. The scrape of patio chairs on concrete. Distant traffic. Birdsong. The bright, particular quality of South Florida morning light, which is not gentle. She was not paying attention. That was the truth of it, and she would have admitted it to herself if pressed. She was typing a response to an email from the structural team while walking, which she never did, which she considered a reckless habit in other people, and which she was doing now because she had gotten approximately 4 hours of sleep and had already been to the gym and had been at her desk by 7 a.m. and was currently running on Cafe Cubano and the very specific fuel of someone who has decided that forward motion is preferable to stillness, because stillness allows you to feel things. She was going into the coffee shop. He was coming out. The door swung. The coffee went. She felt the warmth of it across the back of her hand before she fully registered that she had walked into a person, a solid, stationary, distinctly unbothered person who had absorbed the collision with the equanimity of someone who had braced for worse things than this. Oh, God, I'm so sorry I wasn't. It's all right. His voice was low. Mostly on me. I came out fast. He hadn't, actually. She was fairly sure she had been the problem. But she looked up. He was considerably taller than she'd registered in the first half second, and found him looking at her with an expression that was not irritated and not overly concerned, and not the particular look men sometimes gave her that she had learned to deflect efficiently. He was looking at her the way she looked at structural problems, attentively, without judgment, with the clear sense that he was taking in information. Your hand, he said. She looked down. The back of her right hand was lightly scalded, not badly, just enough to be uncomfortable. She closed it. It's fine, she said. I'm fine. I'm sorry about your coffee. I'll get another. He was already looking around for somewhere to deposit the ruined cup. He was in plain clothes, dark pants, a gray shirt, nothing that told her anything specific. He moved like someone who was used to being aware of his surroundings without appearing to be. Again, I apologize, she said, slightly brisk now, reaching past him to pull open the door she had just destroyed his morning with. I should have been watching where I was going. Most people should be, he said, and there was something in it, not an insult, not a flirt, something drier and more precise than either, that made her pause, one hand on the door, and look at him again. He was watching her. Not in the way that required a response or a deflection. Just watching. She had the distinct and disorienting sensation of being seen with accuracy by someone she had never met. He noticed, in the 7 seconds of their exchange, several things he would later catalog in the particular way he cataloged everything: the rolled blueprint tube under her left arm, paper smooth and professional, architect's work. The slight tension in her jaw that had nothing to do with spilled coffee. The way her eyes moved, once, to the left and over her shoulder, before she caught herself a check unconscious, the look of someone who had been looking over their shoulder so recently that the habit was still running. And her hands steady. Professionally steady, the hands of someone who had trained herself out of trembling. She noticed his stillness. The way he held the coffee cup as if he'd already decided it was a loss, and that was fine. The quality of his attention, which was like being in a room where someone has turned the focus dial all the way up and you hadn't known, until now, that most people had it turned mostly down. His hands on the cup, careful, large, the left one bearing a small scar along the thumb she would later be unable to explain why she'd registered at all. It was brief. 12 seconds, perhaps, from first collision to the moment she went inside and the door closed between them. She got in line. She ordered her coffee. She did not look back through the window. He stood on the sidewalk for a moment after the door closed, in the Wynwood morning, and turned the encounter over once in his mind with the same quiet attention he gave everything. Then he moved on. It was nothing. It was an accident. It was two strangers and a spilled cup and a Miami morning full of other people's stories. Slow, reflective, close to the act. Let the language carry the weight. Some collisions leave no mark on the surface. The damage runs deeper underground, the way things run in this city, beneath the glass and the neon and the salt-sweetened air. Like fault lines. Like grief. Like the particular architecture of a wound that has been tended so carefully, for so long, that it has become indistinguishable from the structure itself. She carried her coffee out the back door and turned north toward the Solara site. He walked south, toward a police precinct and a file that was already changing shape. They did not know each other's names. Load-bearing walls. Diana Voss. Sound. The Voss and Crane boardroom, climate-controlled silence, the soft movement of expensive chairs, the distant city entirely inaudible. A world sealed from outside noise. Diana Voss was the kind of beautiful that required maintenance the way a landmark building does, constant, expert, invisible. She was 45, and she looked like someone who had decided, at some point, that aging was a design problem with solutions, and had applied herself to those solutions with the same disciplined intelligence she brought to everything else. She wore a stone-gray suit that had been made for her body specifically and no other, and her hair was dark and precise. And when she extended her hand across the boardroom table, her grip was firm in the particular way that communicated that she had shaken thousands of hands and had calibrated this one for maximum confidence transfer. "Valentina," she said. "You look well. The Solara facades, the updated renderings. I showed them to the Meridian group last Thursday. They were, to use an uncharacteristically unpolished word, stunned." Valentina smiled. She was good at this smile, warm but measured, the smile of a woman who appreciated praise while remaining professionally grounded in it. The louver system on the South Tower was the key, she said. It gives the building a dynamic shadow line through the day. It'll look different at 8 a.m. than at 6 p.m. The building will feel alive. It will. Diana folded her hands on the table. She had the habit of absolute stillness when she was making a point, as if she had also understood that stillness was a form of authority. We're on track for the groundbreaking ceremony in 60 days. The council vote on the land use variance is in 10 days. I have every reason to believe it will pass comfortably. She paused. 1 beat. 2. There is, however, something I want you to be aware of. Here it is, Valentina thought. The thing the meeting is actually about. Of course, she said. City investigators have been making inquiries about the land acquisition process. Specifically, the chain of ownership transfers for the Port District parcels we acquired in 2021. Diana's expression did not change. This was the impressive part. Her face was a surface, utterly composed, and what moved across it was not emotion but information, delivered at precisely the temperature she chose. It's routine. It happens with projects of this scale. The acquisitions were entirely above board, as you know. A small, brief smile. But I mention it because it's possible someone may reach out to you, as the project architect, with questions. City investigators occasionally interview the full development team. I understand, Valentina said. If they do, of course direct them to our legal team. You have nothing to be concerned about. I simply believe in keeping my people informed. Diana stood, which ended the meeting in the efficient way she ended all things, by making the conclusion obvious. She came around the table and placed one perfectly manicured hand briefly on Valentina's forearm. The Solara project is going to be the defining development of this decade in South Florida. And it is, in very meaningful part, because of you. I hope you know that I know that. Valentina thanked her. She collected her materials. She kept the smile in place through the handshake, through the corridor, through the elevator and the lobby and the heavy glass doors into the Miami afternoon heat. Outside, she stood on the sidewalk for a moment. The compliment was still in her ears. It felt like a hand on her shoulder that was friendly and was also, subtly, applying pressure. She had been appraised. She had been found satisfactory. And she had been, as clearly as if Diana Voss had said it in plain language, warned. She put on her sunglasses and walked to her car and said nothing to anyone. Reopened. Sound, Coral Gables precinct, the low background noise of a working detective floor, keyboards, distant radio, the occasional telephone. Ordinary and relentless. Lieutenant Saracen stopped at the edge of Marco's desk at 11:15 a.m. with a coffee in her hand and the expression of someone who was about to say something casual and meant something else by it entirely. Old paperwork, she said, looking at the spread of documents on his desk. Always, he said without looking up. You've been at that since 7. I like to be thorough. She stood there for a moment longer than the conversation required. Saracen had been his lieutenant for 2 years, and she was sharper than her casual manner suggested, which Marco respected and found occasionally inconvenient. You've got the Solis case active, she said. The Hialeah robbery homicide. What's the update? Waiting on forensics. Lab says Thursday. All right. She moved on. She did not ask again what he was working on. This was either trust or strategy, and Marco had learned that with Saracen. It was usually both simultaneously. After she was gone, he spread the Reyes file fully across his desk. Not conspicuously, he'd positioned himself in the corner section, back to the wall, facing the room so that he would see anyone approaching. Old habit. Good habit. Ernesto Reyes. November 12, 2021. Found at the base of a construction scaffold at the Port District development site at 6:14 a.m. by a site crew arriving for the morning shift. The fall had been, according to the medical examiner, fatal on impact. Blunt force trauma consistent with a fall from approximately the third-level scaffolding, approximately 27 feet. The determination had been accidental. No signs of restraint, no defensive wounds, blood alcohol at the time of death within negligible limits. An accident. A man who worked construction on a construction site in the dark hours before dawn who had fallen. Except. Marco turned to the witness statements. There had been 4. 2 workers who claimed to have arrived at the site at roughly 6 a.m. and found the body. Neither had witnessed the fall. A site supervisor named Guillermo Paz who stated he had been on site from 5:30 and heard nothing unusual before the body was discovered. And a woman named Teresa Gould, administrative assistant, who had been in the site office trailer and also heard nothing. He laid Paz's statement beside the first worker's statement and looked at them together. He had done this last night, and he did it again now, the way you press a wound to confirm it's real. The phrasing was not just similar. It was, in 4 separate phrases across 2 different statements, word for word identical. The scaffolding on level 3 had been inspected the previous Friday and was found to be in compliance. Or had and not flagged it. Or had flagged it somewhere Marco couldn't see. Either way, it was there, and it was the kind of thing that, once seen, could not be unseen. He circled 2 names.
Guillermo Paz.
And the first worker, a man named Davila, whose subsequent address of record turned out to be in Guatemala City, where he had apparently relocated 6 weeks after Ernesto Reyes was found at the foot of a scaffold. Guillermo Paz, however, had not gone anywhere. He had, in fact, been promoted. He was currently employed as a senior site supervisor for a firm called Harbor South Construction, a subsidiary, Marco confirmed in 12 minutes of database work, of VOS and crane development. He sat back. He looked at the ceiling. He thought about what Ortega had said the night before, about being careful who he told. He thought about the permit number, and about what it connected to. He thought about the way these things went, the architecture of corruption, the way it always looked like ordinary paperwork until you turned it at the right angle and suddenly all the load-bearing walls were wrong. He wrote one name at the top of a fresh page, Diana Voss. Then he put the file away, because Sarah Chen was heading back toward his section, and some structures you built only when no one could see the blueprint. The rooftop. Sound. Wynwood rooftop at evening, a string quartet playing at low volume, conversation layered over itself, the clink of glasses, the city spread below and alive, warm air moving through the party like something that does not need an invitation. She had come because she had to come. This was the calculus of professional life in a city like Miami. Some events were not optional, regardless of what you would prefer. And a client reception hosted by the Meridian Group on the rooftop of the Wynwood workshop was definitively not optional when you were the lead architect on the project they were co-financing. So she had gone home and changed into a black dress that required no thought because she had worn it to 7 events exactly like this one. And she had taken a car service because parking in Wynwood on a Thursday night was a form of self-punishment she had decided to forego. She was doing the performance well. She knew she was doing it well because she had practiced it so long that it no longer felt like a performance from the inside. It felt like weather, like something she just moved through. Laughing at the right volume. Holding her champagne at the right angle. Asking the questions that solicited interesting answers from people who needed to feel interesting. Being, in short, exactly as warm as the situation required and no warmer. Then she saw him. He was across the rooftop, near the far railing, in a dark jacket that was slightly more formal than what she remembered from the morning, but not quite formal enough to be at home at an event like this. He was holding a water glass, not champagne. He was not talking to anyone. He was watching a man near the bar with the focused, undemonstrative attention she had clocked on him that morning, the attention that looked, from the outside, like nothing and was actually everything. He turned, as people sometimes did when they were being watched by someone who was trying not to watch them, and their eyes met across 30 feet of rooftop party. A beat. Recognition without context. The coffee shop collision, refracted through evening light and several hundred miles of city noise. He didn't smile. Exactly, something shifted in his expression that was more precise than a smile, something that acknowledged without performing. She held the look for 2 seconds and then looked away first, which she did not typically do. He crossed to her. He moved through the crowd the way water moves through a space, finding the path without effort, disturbing nothing. "Your hand," he said when he reached her. His opening line again. She looked down at the back of her right hand, where the faint scalding from the morning was already invisible. "Survived," she said. "Good." He stood beside her, not in front of her. Next to her, looking out at the city the way she was looking out at the city, and there was something in the positioning that felt less like social navigation and more like an instinct, as if he'd understood that she would be more comfortable being approached from the side than the front. Which was correct, though she didn't know why she noticed that he'd done it. "Are you here for work?" she asked. "Loosely," he said. "You?" "Very strictly." She glanced at him. "I'm an architect. The project being celebrated tonight is one of mine. I'm legally obligated to look delighted about this." She gestured at the party, a small, dry gesture. "Are you? At the project?" "Yes. At the event." She paused. "I'm managing." He made a sound that might have been a laugh, brief, genuine, not performed. "Marco," he said. "Valentina." "The building," he said. "The one being celebrated. What does it do?" And, because this was the one subject she could speak about without performing the one thing she said exactly what she meant about, always, she told him. About the Solara project. About the Louvre system and the shadow line. About the public promenade she'd fought for. About the way she'd conceived of the ground floor as a gift to the street rather than a barrier from it. About what she believed buildings were, at their best, not statements of the people who paid for them, but of the people who would live and work and walk past them every day for decades. He listened the way very few people listened, without preparing his next sentence while she spoke, without performing attentiveness. He just listened, and then he said things that built on what she'd said rather than redirecting toward himself, and she found herself talking for 8 minutes without noticing 8 minutes had passed, which did not happen to her at parties. "What's it like," he asked, "to build something in a place you grew up in?" She looked at him. "Complicated," she said, and there was more in the word than she'd intended, and he heard the more. She could tell by the way he held it, didn't push at it, didn't ignore it. Just received it. "I imagine," he said. She almost told him. She could feel the pressure of it, the anomalous desire to say something true to someone she did not know, and she didn't understand it, and she pulled back from it. Held it, didn't push at it, didn't ignore it. Just received it. "What about you?" she said instead. "Work." Loosely. "What does that mean?" He was careful with his answer. She caught the care, the half-second pause before he spoke. "I look at things until they make sense," he said. "Or until they don't, and I have to figure out why." "That's vague," she said. "It's accurate," he said. She laughed. She surprised herself with it, a real laugh, not a party laugh, the kind that comes up before you've decided to allow it. He watched her laugh with an expression that was not smug or pleased with himself. He just looked at her as if the laugh were something worth seeing, which it was, though she wouldn't have said so. Her phone rang. She looked at the screen. Rafi. And Rafi's calls did not sound the way they used to, light, improvisational, asking if she wanted to grab food. Rafi's calls now had a register she listened for before she even answered, because the wrong register meant something was wrong. "I'm sorry," she said. "I have to take this." "Of course." She stepped away, toward the stairwell door, and she pressed answer and heard her brother's voice, and the register was wrong. She pushed through the stairwell door without looking back. When she looked back, the rooftop later, he was gone. He had been there, and then he had not, the way the best conversations sometimes end cleanly, without the awkward logistics of goodbye, leaving only the afterimage of a person in a particular quality of light. She stood in the evening and pressed her phone to her ear and felt, underneath the fear Rafi's voice was already raising in her, the specific and inconvenient awareness that she wanted to finish that conversation. Rafi's confession. Sound, stairwell, the muffled thump of the party above, concrete echo, the distant city. A small, trapped space. Valentina's breath, slightly unsteady. Rafi, talk to me. Val. His voice was low and tight, and she could hear the effort it cost him to speak at a normal volume. I need to tell you something I should have told you 2 months ago. Okay, tell me now. A long breath. Then, the money. The loan I told you was from a business partner. It came from people who work for Christian Mello. She had known this since Calle Ocho. But hearing him say the name, in this particular stairwell, in this particular city, on this particular night, did something to the air around her. She sat down on the step behind her without deciding to. The concrete was cool through the fabric of her dress. How much? She asked. 40,000, he said. Val, I know. Don't tell me you know. Just keep going. They came to me last month. 2 men. At the garage where I've been working. They were polite, Val. That's the thing, they were polite. They told me the loan terms had changed. That there was another way to settle it. What way? They didn't specify. They said someone would be in touch. They said it had to do with the project. He stopped. With your project. The Solara project. The stairwell was very quiet. She was aware of her own heartbeat, which was steady in the way things are steady when they are working very hard to be. Keep going, she said. That's when I started to think about Papa, Rafi said, and his voice broke, just slightly, at the name, and she felt it in her own chest the way she felt anything that broke in him. They were made of the same thing. I think he found something out. About the Portland. About who Mello was and whose money was going into that development and how the permits were being moved through City Hall. I think he was going to report it. Or already had. And I think. He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't have to. Valentina leaned her head back against the concrete wall of the stairwell. Above her, the party continued its warm and oblivious noise. Below the building, the city continued. Miami, doing what Miami did, generating its own weather, its own music, its own gorgeous surface over everything it did not want examined. Her father had been a man who worked with his hands and kept his word and believed, with the particular stubbornness of a person who had built things from nothing, that the work was what mattered. He had taught her that. He had taught her that blueprints were promises, that structures were commitments, that you did not cut corners because the corners held things up, and if the corners failed, people got hurt. He had believed that. And someone had let him believe it right up until they had found a use for his silence, and when he would not give it, they had taken it from him. Rafi, she said, listen to me very carefully. You are not going to contact these people. You are not going to answer their questions about my project or any other project. You are going to act entirely normal and you are going to let me think. Val. I'll figure it out, she said again. Hermano. I will figure it out. But you have to trust me and you have to stay quiet. Can you do that? A long pause. Then, yeah. Good. Go home. Lock the door. I'll call you tomorrow morning. She hung up. She sat on the concrete step for another minute. Then she stood and smoothed her dress and went back up the stairs to the party, and no one would have known, looking at her face, that anything had happened at all. This was one of the things she was best at, and one of the loneliest. A name in common. Sound, Wynwood sidewalk at night, music from several competing directions, heels on concrete, the smell of rain coming, not yet arrived. Traffic. The city breathing. He had left the rooftop the moment she stepped away to take the call, because the man he'd come to watch, Guillermo Paz, whom he had recognized from an old case photograph with the face recognition precision of someone who made it his business to remember people connected to unsolved problems, had moved toward the elevator. And Marco had a very clear operational principle about not letting persons of interest leave venues ahead of him if he could help it. Paz went home. Marco confirmed his building address and made a note for tomorrow. Routine. Good reconnaissance. He was walking back to his car, parked 2 blocks south, when he passed the stairwell entrance on the side of the building. The door was heavy, the kind that didn't seal properly, and through the gap came a voice, a woman's voice, low and controlled, with the specific quality of someone keeping themselves very carefully together. He didn't eavesdrop on purpose. He was simply, as he always was, extremely good at hearing things. He caught the tail end of a sentence. 3 words, really. Or 1 word and a context. Mellow. He stopped walking. The door was closed. He stood on the Wynwood sidewalk, and the name rang in him the way case-relevant names rang, not loudly, but deeply, at the frequency of things that were true. He knew that name. It was in the Reyes file, not prominently, not flagged, but there, in a property record footnote, because Christian Mello's name appeared in the ownership chain of a holding company that had been involved in the Port District land transfers of 2021. He turned. He looked at the door. It did not open again. He stood in the warm pre-rain air of the Wynwood night and did not go back to the car yet and made himself think clearly. Someone in that stairwell had said Mello's name with the inflection of a person for whom that name was not abstract, not gossip, something personal and frightening. He went to his car. He opened the valves to something under the professional layer. He turned to the next of kin page. Valentina Reyes, daughter. Architect. Brickell. He looked at the name for a long time. He thought, the woman on the rooftop, the rolled blueprint, the way she'd looked over her shoulder without knowing she was doing it, the controlled steadiness of her, the laugh that had surprised her more than it surprised him. He thought, Solara Project, Waterfront Development, Port District, Voss and Crane, the land. He thought, she is in this. She doesn't know how much. She might be running from it. She might be standing on top of it and calling it her career. He thought, she said Mello's name like she was afraid of it. He closed the file. He started the car. He did not drive away immediately. Something was clicking into place with the particular cold precision he associated with cases that were about to become very serious. He had learned, over 17 years, to trust that click. It had saved his life twice and cost him sleep on 100 other occasions, and he trusted it absolutely, even when, especially when, what it was telling him was something he would rather not know. He drove toward Coral Gables. He had work to do. What she builds. Sound. A Brickell apartment at midnight, the distant hum of the city reduced to its bass note, a fan moving air somewhere, the click of a keyboard. Silence of the kind that presses in rather than releasing. Her apartment was spare and beautiful in the way that things are sparse and beautiful when someone has thought very carefully about what they actually need. Clean lines. High ceilings, which she had insisted on when she rented it, because she spent her days thinking about space, and she could not come home to a ceiling that crowded her. A drafting table by the east window, different from the one at the office, older, wood-surfaced, bought at an estate sale and refinished by her own hands over a weekend. Models on the shelves, small, detailed studies of buildings she had designed or admired, the physical thinking of an architectural mind that worked best when it could touch the problem. On the corner of the drafting table, in a small silver frame, was her father's face. He was grinning in the photograph. It was from a groundbreaking ceremony for a school in Hialeah, one of his projects, and he was wearing a hard hat and holding a commemorative shovel and grinning the way he grinned when he was genuinely proud of something, which was wide and unguarded in a way that most of his other expressions were not. He had been a careful man, her father. Careful with money, careful with words, careful with the promises he made, because he kept every one of them. He had not been careful enough with the knowledge he'd carried in the last months of his life, and that was the crack in the foundation she had been building over for 4 years. She sat down at her laptop. She opened the Miami-Dade Public Records database. She knew it well. She navigated it constantly for permitting and site data. She entered the Solara project site coordinates. She pulled up the land acquisition records. She had done this before, early in the commission, the basic due diligence of an architect who wanted to understand the land she was designing for. She had found nothing alarming. But she had not, at that time, been looking for a permit number. She had not been looking for her father's name. She entered P 2021-09-4471. The document that came up was the same one she had received in the photograph. Port District Development Permit, September 2021. Approved. Approved by V. Crane, Deputy Director. And listed as Contractor of Record, Reyes, Ernesto J., for a preliminary site assessment on parcels that were now, she checked, cross-referenced, confirmed. 3 of the 6 parcels comprising the land on which the Solara project was under development. She sat back. She put her hands in her lap. She looked at the screen. Her father had worked this land. He had assessed it. He had signed permits for it. 3 weeks later, Vincent Crane had countersigned those permits. 2 weeks after that, Ernesto Reyes was dead at the foot of a scaffold on the adjacent site. And 3 years after that, his daughter had been commissioned by the firm whose deputy director had signed his permits to build the most important project of her career on the same parcels. She thought, did Diana know? When she called me in. When she offered me the commission. When she looked at me across that table with her perfect gravity and her careful praise, did she know whose daughter I was? Of course she knew. Voss and Crane had worked with her father. His name was on their permits. She had always known. The commission was not an opportunity. The commission was a kind of architecture in itself, a structure built to hold something in place. To keep Valentina Reyes so deeply invested in the Solara project, so professionally committed, so exposed, that she would never, could never, look too closely at the ground it stood on. She sat with that for a long time. The Café Cubano on the edge of the table went cold. The city outside the window continued its immense indifferent business. The fan moved air. The light from the screen held her face in its blue-white exposure. She looked like someone who had just seen the load-bearing wall behind the drywall, who had understood, for the first time, what the whole structure was actually holding up. She did not close the laptop. She did not move for a very long time. Here is what they teach you in architecture school about secrets. The most dangerous structures are not the ones that show their weaknesses. Those are the ones you can fix. The most dangerous structures are the ones that look the most stable, the ones that have been engineered so precisely to distribute the weight of what they're hiding that you can walk through them for years and feel nothing but solid ground beneath your feet. Until the load shifts. Until something new is added. Until someone somewhere begins to look at the walls instead of through them. Until the fault lines move. Fault lines. Rain. Sound. A Miami downpour beginning. The first fat drops on hot pavement. The smell of rain on asphalt. The sudden percussion of it accelerating. Thunder rolling in from the southwest. The city going briefly quiet beneath the weight of it, and then continuing. Because Miami does not stop for rain. The rain came at noon and came hard, the way Miami rain always does, without preamble, without gradation, simply a decision made by the sky and enacted immediately. Marco was already in his car across from the Voss and Crane building when it started, and he watched the rain reshape the city around him without moving, which was the particular patience of someone who had been on long surveillances and understood that discomfort was simply weather. He was, technically, on his lunch break. He was, technically, doing nothing wrong. He was a homicide detective sitting in a car on a public street in the rain, and if Sarah Chen called right now, he would say he was thinking, which was true. And he would say it had nothing to do with an off-books case. He was quietly excavating from the closed file archives, which was less true. He was watching the building's entrance, waiting for Guillermo Paz, who his sources told him worked a rotating site schedule that sometimes brought him to the Voss and Crane offices for afternoon coordination meetings. He was, in short, doing reconnaissance in the rain on his own time, which was either dedicated or reckless, and he had stopped distinguishing between those two words sometime around his 34th birthday. At 12:22, the building's lobby doors opened and Valentina Reyes walked out under a small umbrella, moving with the quick, purposeful stride of someone who knows exactly where she is going. She turned north. She was carrying a folder and her phone, and she wasn't looking at anything but the direction she was walking. Marco sat up slightly. He looked at his hands. He looked at the door. Don't follow her, he told himself. She's a civilian. She's a person of interest in a case you haven't even officially opened. She's the daughter of a dead man whose death you are looking at off the books. You have no standing. You have no authority. You have a lunch break and a set of ethics you have maintained for 17 years, and this is not how professionals behave. He got out of the car. He followed her. He told himself it was reconnaissance. He told himself he was very good at telling himself things. The records office. Sound. Public records office, the flat, institutional quiet of fluorescent lights and filing systems, the rustle of document pages, a clerk's quiet efficiency, rain on the windows outside. The Miami-Dade Public Records Office on the second floor of the government center was not a place most people went voluntarily, and this afternoon, with the rain keeping the streets less populated than usual, it was nearly empty. The clerk at the front desk, a man named Eduardo who had worked this desk for 12 years and had achieved a very refined quality of professional neutrality, directed Valentina to the permit documentation archives, and she thanked him and went to the appropriate section and began pulling files. She was looking for the full ownership chain for the Port District parcels. She had the permit number. She needed the linked acquisition documents, the ones that would show her exactly when, and from whom, and through whose authorization, those parcels had moved into Voss and Crane's portfolio. She was not entirely sure what she would do with this information. She was doing the thing she always did when she was frightened and needed to think. She was gathering data. She had been at the archive table for 8 minutes when she heard the door. She looked up. He came across the room. He stopped when he saw her. She watched the moment of recognition move across his face, not slowly, not with any performance, just the clean fact of it. You. Here. Now. He was carrying a small notebook. He had clearly been heading for the same section of the archive. They looked at each other across a records desk in a fluorescent-lit room in Miami-Dade County, in the rain, and the moment had a quality that Valentina would later attempt to describe to herself and fail, because it was not romantic. Not in the soft focus sense, but it was electric. The word was insufficient, but it was accurate. The animal certainty that you are in the presence of something that is going to matter. Slow, precise. Let the dialogue carry the weight without rushing it. He reached into his jacket and produced a badge and held it toward her. Not aggressive. Just clear. Detective Marco Duval, he said. Miami-Dade homicide. The word hung in the space between them. Homicide. She heard it with the part of her mind that tracked danger, the part that had been very active for the past 24 hours. She thought of Rafi's voice in the stairwell. She thought of the permit photo. She thought of her father's name on a document signed 3 weeks before he fell. Valentina Reyes, she said. Her voice was steady. Architect. He looked at the folders she had spread on the table. He looked at her face. He said, "What are you looking for?" And she looked at him, at his badge, at the notebook in his hand, at the particular quality of attention he brought to everything, which she had now experienced across 3 encounters, and which had consistently made her feel more seen than was comfortable. And she said, before she could stop herself, "The same thing you are." And there it was. Not desire, not yet, not exactly. Something prior to desire, more fundamental. The recognition of a shared wound. The simultaneous relief and terror of finding someone else in the same room with the same dark knowledge, and knowing that this changes everything, and not knowing at all whether for better or for worse. He put his notebook on the table across from her folders. He pulled out the chair across from her and sat down. He looked at her directly, and she looked back. "Tell me what you have," he said. "Tell me why a homicide detective is pulling Port District permit records on his lunch break," she said. A pause. Something shifted in his face, not quite a smile. "Fair," he said. "Impossible." Sound. A diner across from the records office, coffee cups, rain on glass, the low conversation of 2 other customers at the far end, a radio somewhere playing something indistinct and old. The rain is heavy now. Nowhere to be. The coffee was genuinely bad. This was an objective fact they established within 2 minutes of sitting down, and it became, in some way, a gift, a shared small thing that made the enormous other things slightly easier to approach. "The permit record links your father to the parcels that Voss and Crane acquired in 2021, Marco said. He was careful with it. She had noticed that he was always careful, that he did not say more than he had confirmed, that his language was precise without being cold. He was listed as contractor of record on the site assessment. "I know," she said. "I found that last night." "When did you receive the photograph?" 2 nights ago. 6:11 p.m. Unknown number. 1 image, no message. I deleted the text, but kept the photo. She paused. "I don't know who sent it." "Can I see it?" She looked at him. She was aware, with a precision that she associated with the assessment of structural risks, of exactly what showing him that photograph meant. It meant trusting someone she had met 3 times in 2 days. It meant handing information to a homicide detective without knowing what he would do with it, or whether it would put Rafi in the path of something larger. It meant choosing, again, between the careful isolation that had kept her safe for 4 years and the terrifying possibility of being, just once, not alone in this. She took out her phone. She found the image. She put it on the table between them and slid it toward him. He looked at it for a long time. Then he photographed it with his own phone, methodically, without asking, and then looked at her with a question in his face, whether that had been all right. She had not stopped him. It had been all right. 2 witnesses at the scene gave nearly identical statements, he said. For phrases, word for word. That doesn't happen without coaching. One of those witnesses is in Guatemala. The other works site supervision for a Voss and Crane subsidiary. She wrapped her hands around her bad coffee cup and said nothing for a moment. Then, "How long have you been looking at this?" "Officially? I'm not. The case is closed. I'm looking at it off the books." "Because you think he was murdered?" He didn't look away from her. "I think the determination of accidental death was reached too quickly, with evidence that warranted more scrutiny than it received." That's a thing, but close in the way that things are close when the space between them is more specific than the distance suggests. She was aware of his hands. She had been aware of his hands since the first time she'd seen them, and she found this awareness inconvenient and was unable to locate the switch to turn it off. "You need to be careful," he said. "If you've received that photograph, someone is pointing you toward this. I don't know who or why yet. but you're being used as a variable in something. You need to be careful who you tell, what you look at, and whether you give anyone in your professional circle reason to think you're concerned about the land acquisition history. I've been careful my whole life, she said. It came out quieter than she'd intended. It hasn't kept anything safe. He didn't answer immediately. He looked at her in the particular way he had, receiving rather than responding, taking the full weight of what she'd said before deciding what to do with it. When he did speak, it was not a solution. It was something rarer and somehow more useful. No, he said. It doesn't always. Pause. Hold the diner around them. Let the rain be its own sound. They sat in the rain-sound diner with the weight of everything unsaid, and the weight was considerable, and neither of them moved to leave, and the bad coffee got colder, and outside Miami rearranged itself in the rain and went right on being Miami. When she finally left, she walked to the door and turned once. He was still at the table, looking at his phone, the permit photo, she supposed. He didn't look up. She pushed through the door into the rain. She thought, I showed him the photograph. I don't know why I showed him the photograph. I should not have shown him the photograph. She thought, he said no, it doesn't always, and he said it like someone who had learned that from the inside, and I believe him, and I don't know what to do with that. She walked into the rain without her umbrella. She had left it at the records office and let the city soak her through, which felt, for exactly 1 block, like something approaching relief. Camille. Sound. A moving car in Miami rain, wipers, the rhythmic displacement of water, the muffled city behind glass. A man alone with a phone call and what it tells him. He drove north on Brickell, the rain coming in curtains off the bay. He waited until he was 5 blocks from the records building and then pulled over and dialed Camille Okafor's direct line, not her office, not her assistant. The number she'd given him for things that weren't for offices or assistants. She picked up on the second ring. Marco. Camille. I need 5 minutes. I have 3. He heard a door close on her end. She was moving to privacy. He appreciated that she still understood how to do that, even from inside the glass walls of city council work. The Reyes case, he said. Ernesto Reyes. Port District, 2021. I'm reopening it. Quietly. A silence. Not a surprised silence, a thinking silence. Camille Okafor's silences were always thinking silences. He had learned that about her in the 2 years he had known her through day, through her husband, his partner, who had been in the ground for 3 years and whose name he still could not say out loud without something reorganizing in his chest. Marco, she said finally. Be careful who you tell. There it was. The answer that was also a question and also a warning, all at once. You know something, he said. I know a lot of things that aren't safe to say over the phone. He heard her breathing. The rain on his windshield was very loud. I'll meet you. Tomorrow, if I can manage it. But Marco. She stopped. The Solara project. The city council vote on the land use variance comes up in 10 days. I know. There are people who will do anything to make sure that vote goes through. Do you understand what I'm telling you? Anything. Who, he said. Not on the phone. Another pause. I'll meet you. Be careful until then. She hung up. He sat in the rain with the phone in his hand and the shape of what she'd said filling the car with its particular weight. 10 days. A vote on a land use variance that had to pass for a development project to proceed. A development project built on land a dead man had assessed and permitted and apparently known something about. And an architect, that architect, this specific and complicated and careful woman, whose name was on the project and whose father's name was on the permit and who had shown him a photograph she should not have shown anyone yet. He looked at his phone. At the permit image. Keep it professional, he told himself. Keep it clean. She's the daughter of the victim in a case you're investigating. She's connected to the primary institutional subject of that case. She is, potentially, a person of interest. You do not know yet whether she is running from this or toward it, or whether she is, in ways she may not herself fully understand, inside it. Keep it clean. The narrator notes, with quiet irony, that he had told himself this before. In 3 years of carrying a dead partner's absence like a wound that had learned to be invisible, he had told himself many things with great conviction. He had been right about most of them. The ones he'd been wrong about, those were the ones that had cost him. He started the car. He drove toward the precinct. He did not stop thinking about her face in the diner, or the way she'd said it hasn't kept anything safe, like something that had been true for a very long time, and she was only now saying out loud. He drove. What the city knows. Sound. Miami after dark, after rain, the city washed and glittering, the streets steaming faintly, salsa music from somewhere deep in the grid, the bay moved by wind, the smell of salt and exhaust and night-blooming jasmine. The city at its most beautiful and least honest. Night had fallen again over Miami, as it always did and always would, not with stealth, not with apology, but with the blunt, gorgeous efficiency of a city that had never seen any reason to be subtle. The lights came on. The bay caught them. The towers threw their reflections into the water, and the water held them, shimmering, like a city that existed only in the asking. Valentina stood on her balcony in dry clothes with a fresh cup of Café Cubano she had not yet tasted. She was looking south, toward the Port District, toward the place she always ended up looking when she let herself stop performing. The cranes were lit at night with amber warning lights, and at this distance they looked less like machinery and more like something ancient, sentinels, maybe. Or monuments. She was holding the photograph of her father. She had taken it from the drafting table and brought it out with her, which she did not typically do. But tonight she wanted his face where she could see it while she thought, and she was allowing herself that, because she had been very good for a very long time at not allowing herself the things she needed, and she was beginning to understand, slowly, the cost of that discipline.
Papá.
¿Qué sabías? What did you know, and when did you know it, and who did you tell? And did you have any idea, when you signed those permits, when you walked that land, when you did the work with the integrity you always brought to everything, did you have any idea that it would end the way it ended? Did you know what you were standing on top of? She looked at his grinning face in the photograph, the hard hat, the ceremonial shovel, the groundbreaking he had been so proud of. She had been at that groundbreaking. She remembered his voice that day. This is what we do, Amija. We build things that last. She pressed the photograph to her chest for a moment. Then she put it down on the balcony railing and looked out at the city and let herself hold everything at once, the grief, the fury, the fear, and underneath all of it, she could not pretend it wasn't there. The persistent and unreasonable awareness of a man in a diner who had said, no, it doesn't always, and had meant it, and whose hands she had noticed on the table, and who knew what she was walking through because he was, in some different way, walking through it too. She was not naive enough to call that anything yet, but she was honest enough to note it. 2 miles south, Marco Duval was in his car in the parking lot of the Coral Gables precinct. He had gone inside and filed some paperwork and spoken to Sarah Chin about the Solis case and done every ordinary thing that made him appear, to everyone watching, like a detective working his active cases in the ordinary way. And then he had come back out to his car and opened his notebook. He had written, in the center of a fresh page, one name, Valentina Reyes. He had drawn a line to, Solara Project. He had drawn a line to, Ernesto Reyes, closed case. He had drawn a line to, Diana Voss/Voss and Crane Development. He had drawn a line to, Guillermo Paz, witness, Voss and Crane subsidiary. He had drawn a line to, Christian Mello, federal investigation, money laundering/cartel ties. He had drawn a line to, Permit P 2021-09-4471. He had drawn a line to Camille knows something. He looked at the web he had drawn. It was not large, but it was dense, the way the most dangerous things were dense, where every line connected to every other line and pulling on one moved all the others. He had been building this web for 3 weeks and it had been abstract, casework, the geometry of investigation. It was still that. It was also, now, something else. Something that included a woman with a rolled blueprint under her arm who looked over her shoulder without knowing she was doing it and had given him a photograph he had not asked for and had said the same thing you are in a fluorescent records room while the rain came down outside. He looked at his notepad for a long time. He looked at her name. He thought about crossing it out, the professional notation, the one that said, possible suspect, keep distance, preserve objectivity. He had done this before. He was good at it. He had built his career on the precise maintenance of distance, on the ability to keep the work from touching the parts of himself that would compromise the work. He did not cross out her name. He closed the notebook. He sat in the parking lot of the Coral Gables precinct under the washed, post-rain Miami sky, and he could not have said what stopped him crossing it out, only that something did, and that this was, all by itself, a kind of information. The final passage. Large, lyrical, cinematic. The narrator speaking for the city and through it. Let this land. This is what Miami knows, and has always known, and will know long after the glass towers and the port cranes and the permit offices and the rooftop bars have come and gone and been replaced by other glass towers and other cranes. The city was built on swamp and sand. It was built on money that came from nowhere and went everywhere and asked no questions on the way through. It was built on the labor of people who were never given credit, who built things that bore other people's names, who assessed land and signed permits and fell from scaffolding and were ruled accidents and were grieved by the people who loved them and then were filed away. It was built on the beautiful and dangerous conviction that here, of all places, you could become something new. You could arrive with nothing and leave a mark. You could be born in Little Havana above a Botanica and end up with your name in the title block of the most ambitious building in South Florida. You could grow up in Opelika and earn your badge and become a man who solved things, who found the truth in the shape of things when everyone else had decided the shape was final. You could believe that here, the story of what you were was not the same as the story of what you would become. Miami let you believe that. Miami was very good at letting you believe that. And underneath all of it, patient as bedrock, indifferent to the dreams and the glass and the neon and the grief, the truth. Permanent. Waiting. With the particular cold calm of something that has been buried for a long time and knows, without urgency, that nothing stays buried here. Not in this city. Not in this heat. Not when the fault lines have already begun to move. Not when two people, standing on opposite sides of the same wound, have already found each other once too many times to call it coincidence. Not now. Episode 2 teaser, The Vote. Sound, a low, building tone beneath the narration. Something scored, the auditory equivalent of a held breath. Urgent. Quiet urgency. The kind of voice you use when what you are saying matters more than how you are saying it. 10 days. That was what was left. 10 days until the city council vote that would finalize the land use variance for the Solara project, that would make the groundbreaking official, make the contract irrevocable, make every line of inquiry into those Port District parcels that much harder to pursue. 10 days, and the machinery was already moving. Valentina's phone lit up at 3 a.m. with a second photograph from the same unknown number. This one was not a permit document. This one was a photo of two people at a table in a rain-soaked diner, seen through the window from the street. Her back to the camera. His face visible, partially, in profile. Someone had been watching. Someone was still watching. And they wanted her to know it. Across town, Rafi Reyes opened his door to two men he did not know and felt the particular cold that his sister would have recognized, because they had inherited it from the same source. The cold of the thing you were trying not to believe arriving on your doorstep, politely in the dark. In the Voss and Crane offices, on the 34th floor, Diana Voss looked at something on her phone and permitted herself a very small, very controlled smile, which was the most dangerous thing she ever did. And Camille Okafor did not show up to her meeting with Marco. She sent one text, "Can't. Be careful." And then nothing. Her line went to voicemail. Her assistant said she had taken personal leave. Her city council office said she was unavailable. At midnight, in the rain, because Miami was nothing if not consistent about its weather and its timing, someone knocked on Valentina Reyes's door. She looked through the peephole. She took a breath. She opened it. Marco Duval stood in the hallway, rain damp, no badge visible, nothing professional in his posture or his expression. Just a man who had driven across the city at midnight because there was something she needed to know and he could not make himself wait until morning to tell her. And there was something in his face she had not seen there before, not the detective, not the careful professional who measured his words and his distance with the precision of someone who had learned that distance was a survival tool. Just the man. Just this man, in the rain, with the case between them and the city below them and everything they had not said yet suspended in the charged air of her doorway. Slow close. Let it rest on the question. The most dangerous thing in Miami right now was not the corruption. It was not the cartel money moving through land acquisitions and permit approvals like water through sand. It was not even the truth, with its cold patience and its permanent weight. It was the two people in this doorway who had gotten too close to each other to be safe, and who were going to keep going anyway. Episode 2, The Vote, coming next. Forbidden Love, Miami is an original work of fiction. All characters, events, organizations, and locations depicted in this script are entirely fictional and are products of the author's imagination. Any resemblance to actual persons, living or dead, actual events, or actual organizations is purely coincidental.